Hey guys, it's Jess from Misfortune Astrology. How's everybody doing? It's been a minute since I made a video. Was trying to wait out the Mercury retrograde period and make sure that we were in full and clear good energy, but I did notice that I stopped making videos and the entire world went to shit. So, you know, I'm not saying that those two things are connected, but you can do the math yourself. So back today with a video on Venus. Actually, Venus retrograde is coming up. So a lot of people don't know this because Mercury retrograde has become kind of the buzz that everyone talks about in astrology, but all of the planets go retrograde. Some of them retrograde every year. Some of them spend, you know, months and months at a time retrograde. Like Pluto spends like half the year retrograde every year, and most people don't notice it one way or another because he moves so slowly anyway. But all of the personal planets retrograde relatively frequently. That's Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So we talk about Mercury quite a bit because he retrogrades the most. Being the closest to the sun, it happens quite often. He's usually retrograde 3, sometimes up to 4 times a year, although that's fairly rare. Venus and Mars also retrograde fairly frequently. Venus goes retrograde once every 18 months, and Mars goes retrograde every 2.5 years. Now, 2020 has obviously been shaping up astrologically to be a big year for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that all of our personal planets will be going retrograde during this year. Mercury's already been once, he's going to go 2 more times. Venus is going retrograde very soon, and Mars will go retrograde towards the end of the year once he gets to Aries, which is one of the signs that he rules, so that's going to be a big deal for everybody. But let's talk Venus today because a lot of the same types of issues come up. It's just a different flavor because it's Venus energy as opposed to Mercury. Now with Mercury, it's thoughts, communications, transportation, nothing sexy about it, mostly just annoying type stuff we need to have a rethink. Venus is a little bit more fun, and I use that word, you know, kind of loosely because, again, it's retrograde, so things can definitely go wonky. But at least it involves kind of more sexy type stuff, right? So Venus is all about our love, money, the way we value things, the way we relate, and largely has to do with our overall aesthetic sense. So the cool thing about Venus retrograde is that our entire value system will kind of be recalibrated in some specific area of our life. And so if we're kind of aware of the duration of the retrograde, you know, pre-shadow and post-shadow, that, you know, it can overall be a very beneficial experience if we know what to look for. Now, the reason I'm doing this video today, because I'm sure a lot of you who are up to date on astrology are just kind of like, hey, wait a minute, you know, Venus doesn't actually go retrograde until next month. And that is true. She does not start her retrograde motion until May. However, she enters the shadow today, right? And the end of the shadow period isn't until the end of July. Okay, so if you do the math there, we have several months of this cycle. Now that's kind of, you know, there's pluses and minuses, right? Venus doesn't go retrograde as often as Mercury, but her retrograde cycle lasts way, way longer. With Mercury, we're talking 6 to 7 weeks max. You know, with Venus, we're talking more a few months, okay? So this is something that, you know, you definitely want to start paying attention to because as with Mercury, you know, the pre-shadow lead up to the retrograde is the time when whatever, you know, lesson is going to be imparted upon you, that's when the introduction happens. So if you don't start paying attention now, Venus is going to go retrograde starting in about a month. And, you know, that's, again, like I use this analogy all the time, it's like walking into a movie halfway through and wondering why everybody's fighting. You know, you don't have any idea what you're supposed to be looking for or what's happening because you've basically missed the beginning, okay? And you're walking in the middle. So start paying attention now. So Venus, this entire retrograde for Venus is going to occur in Gemini. Lucky us, okay? Venus in Gemini is all about choices in love, money. You know, it's communicative, and you know, there's a lot going on with Venus in Gemini. It's not huge on commitment though, so you know, just kind of keep an eye on that. Venus through Gemini transits generally are not a good time for committing to anything in love or finance. You know, a lot of choices tend to be presented to you. That's certainly going to be the case, kind of amplified now with her going retrograde. So the advice on any type of love or financial issue is certainly to wait out this retrograde period. You know, that sounds really shitty. A lot of people say, you know, oh, you want me to wait until the end of July. I mean, yeah, you know, in something as important as love or your finances, like if it feels like it's rushed, then you probably shouldn't be making the decision anyway, right? So let's talk about the degree range. Gemini, it's 5 degrees through 21. Yep, I wrote it down just to make sure. So the degree range for this retrograde is 5 degrees of Gemini through 21 degrees of Gemini. Now that's a big chunk, okay? That's like almost 2/3 of the sign, right? Well, a little more than half of the sign. Close enough, right? Good enough for government work. So, you know, anybody who has points or planets within that degree range, you need to, you know, you definitely need to be paying attention to this. Now, that's going to cover people who have birthdays, you know, basically starting in May through at least early June. I didn't check that degree range, but, you know, so your sun is definitely going to be, you know, implicated, but absolutely anybody can have something in Gemini. You know, I'm an Aquarius. I have Virgo rising. Gemini is my midheaven. So anybody who has Virgo rising, Gemini is probably going to be your midheaven too. That's an angle. That's a huge, huge point in a person's chart. So if Venus is going to be going back and forth over this point, you absolutely want to know it, because it's probably going to bring some changes to you in your career, the way you make money, or your reputation, right? 10th house, okay? You know, so you don't want to be messing around with some guy and like have everybody find out about it. That's the kind of, you know, this is the kind of thing that can happen during a Venus retrograde in the 10th house. I also have Jupiter in the 10th house. It's, you know, in Gemini, right? So it's kind of later in the degrees. It's not going to affect me, but it's something that you want to know if there's anything in there, because you're right in the line of fire. So essentially, like I said, what's going to happen is we're going to have a recalibration of our value system, okay? Now, there are some do's and don'ts that, you know, that we really want to pay attention to with Venus retrograde, okay? So like with Mercury, we pay attention to things like contracts. You know, you don't want to sign contracts and things like that, okay? With Venus, again, we're talking love, we're talking money, we're talking art, we're talking aesthetics, we're talking the way we relate to people. You know, lots of different potential things that could fall into those categories. So I made a nice little list of do's and don'ts, okay? So don't spend a lot of money on something unless you have like a lot of disposable income that you're willing to part with. Now, what ends up happening invariably with this transit is, you know, there'll be something that you've coveted for kind of a long time, and all of a sudden it will become available. It's a big ticket item, you know, like a boat, a house. And we're not talking about, you know, little everyday items that we buy all the time. It's usually something that, you know, that you really, really want, and that's going to set you back quite a bit. Now, if it's something that you've had your eye on for a long time and it goes on sale, then that could be an indication that it's okay to pull the trigger on it. But generally speaking, you know, making big ticket item purchases during Venus retrograde is definitely not a smart idea. What else? Don't test out any new stylists during Venus retrograde. So Venus rules beauty, okay? And what happens invariably in this instance is that you know, the person that you're working with either just doesn't get your aesthetic sense, maybe they just suck altogether. You know, you end up thinking that you want a certain haircut, and you know, you get it, and then all of a sudden you realize like, oh God, this is not what I wanted. You know, so just again, Venus retrograde, beauty, they don't mix. So don't do anything serious with your appearance during this time. Don't get any type of cosmetic surgery or any surgery at all that involves any visible part of your body, especially your face. Okay, now cosmetic surgery, I mean, that's a huge no-no, but this one can get a little tricky. So I actually worked with a woman not too long ago who was telling me that she needed dental surgery, and that she had it scheduled for this coming June. And she was a Venus ruled person, right? I think she had either Libra or Taurus rising. And so my, you know, red flag immediately went up for me at that point, because I was like, you need to reschedule that surgery. You know, it's dental surgery. It's not something that you necessarily think of as beauty or cosmetic, right? But it's your face, it's your mouth. God forbid, you know, something go wrong during that surgery during a Venus retrograde, it's much more likely to happen. You know, and then she's scarred, or she has like some sort of issue with like a very visible part of her body. So clearly not something you want to do. So kind of pay attention to that one. Don't take on any major redecoration projects or renovations in your home. You know, little things are fine, but you don't want to undertake like an entire painting project and then a few months from now realize that you absolutely hate the color that you picked, because that will happen. No tattoos or body piercings. Either, again, they're going to get messed up, or you're going to regret them when it's over. And absolutely no weddings or engagements during this time, okay? So, I mean, if you planned a wedding already, chances are good with coronavirus that you're already thinking, you know, or having to rethink that date. But generally speaking, you know, it's never a good time to plan any type of wedding, you know, any type of ceremony like that during a Venus retrograde. If you are thinking about proposing to somebody during this time, you might want to wait until August. Just, you know, just saying. You know, the problem with all these kind of don'ts is that when Venus goes retrograde, we all kind of have these like rose-colored glasses stuck on our face. And so, you know, again, because our value system is skewed, all of a sudden we think that we want something. And, you know, during the transit while it's going on, we're kind of confident in that decision. But again, once she spins direct and clears that shadow, we revert back to the aesthetics that were always important to us to begin with, and we realize like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Like that, that's kind of the tagline for Venus retrograde is, what the hell was I thinking? So just, keep that in mind. If it's something that you wouldn't normally think to do and you feel like you're being impulsive and that's a good thing, usually I would absolutely encourage people to kind of think outside the box, just not so much during Venus retrograde if it has to do with your money, your love, your appearance, that kind of stuff. Things that are good to do during Venus retrograde, because believe it or not, there are some, actually some things that are indicated here. If you are an artist, exhibiting old work is favored during this time, okay? So if you're sitting on a collection of paintings or something that have, that you've had hanging around for a long time, now is a good time to kind of put them out there and see if you can get interest in them. Again, this is, we're rethinking, we're revisiting all of those words that, those buzzwords that come along with any type of retrograde, those apply here. And so there's, kind of a reevaluation of your own aesthetics. So great idea to kind of try to exhibit them and see if you can't make some money or profit off of things that, that may not have been successful before, but this time around the energy might favor that. Do absolutely work on your self-esteem and your self-care routines. All retrogrades are good for going inward. And with Venus going retrograde, going inward in some of the most personal ways is really good. Venus does rule self-esteem. So to the extent that you can up your own self-care during this time, such that you'll come out on the other side with a much higher self-esteem, that's a best, one of the best possible ways to use the energy. Do go ahead and rekindle an old flame if it feels safe to do so. Now, this is totally not something, advice that I would give to somebody during a Mercury retrograde. It's relatively common for an ex to pop up during a Mercury retrograde, especially if he's retrograde in certain houses. But Mercury doesn't rule love. And so that's kind of why the blanket don't do it during Mercury retrograde is that's why astrologers say that. Not the case so much with Venus retrograde. Venus does rule love. So, even more so, it might be indicated that an old flame will try to connect with you. Now, if you broke up for reasons that were not toxic or abuse related, then it, then you may very well be in line with the energy, and it may make sense for you to give it another shot. Just don't make any firm commitments until after she leaves the retrograde, the retrograde shadow. Let's see what else. Oh, and do look for bargains during this time. So it's not a great idea to buy big ticket items, okay? That's kind of, another blanket. Venus retrograde, don't do it. However, because everybody's value systems are skewed, people who try to sell into a Venus retrograde, their values are also skewed, okay? So it's very common for people to undervalue things that that they wouldn't otherwise do. And I have a perfect example of this, okay? I have a friend who, she loves yard sales, right? And one day she was going through a yard sale, and it was during a Venus retrograde, and she found a copy of The Cat in the Hat, and it turned out to be like one of the very first edition copies. She bought this thing for like 50 cents at a yard sale, and it turned out to be worth hundreds of dollars. Like, it didn't have the dust jacket, so it wasn't like thousands of dollars, but still. I mean, it was like, one of the first printings of this book ever. Totally ridiculous, not something you would expect, but I mean, this is a typical kind of Venus retrograde presentation. So do pay attention to that. If you see something and you have the expertise to know that that whatever it is being offered at a price that's way below value, scoop that shit up. Like, that's absolutely a great use of this energy. And one kind of last thing, so it is also fairly common, I've heard this play out a few different times. People who are going through a divorce during a Venus retrograde, it's because again, we're talking love and money at this time, so it's kind of like a double whammy. It's very common for the energy of this particular transit to cause one of the parties to a divorce to just kind of throw up their hands and be like, F this, I do not want to deal with this anymore, and to walk away, right? Now, the problem with that is that these people who do this, they end up looking back with regret, because they could have gotten more out of it, right? They could have gotten more visitation with their children. They could have gotten more in child support. They could have gotten more property, whatever, right? It's at this point, like the energy becomes overwhelming. And so, and divorces suck anyway, regardless of when they happen. So, but, the point being that, again, your value system is skewed. You may not think that these things matter to you, and they probably feel like they don't matter to you now during Venus retrograde, but it's a trap. Like, they absolutely will matter when the energy corrects itself down the line. So don't, again, don't make any firm commitments in love or money. Again, one of the biggest problems with retrogrades in general, and Venus certainly is subject to this problem too, is that it energizes this area, okay? So at the same time, you kind of have this paradox of me sitting here telling you like, don't do it, but you will be tempted to do it, right? All of the sudden, things that don't matter to you normally, aesthetically or in love or whatever, will start to matter, right? Like all of the sudden, you know, something will just get kind of thrown in your face, okay? It'll be like, you know, you've been totally fine with the same haircut for 5 years, but now all of a sudden you want a new look, okay? Or, you know, you've been friends with this guy that you go to meetings with every few weeks, and now all of a sudden, you know, he's starting to look real sexy to you or something like that, right? You know, the house down the street that you've always wanted to buy suddenly goes on the market, you know, and so it's again, it's a trap, right? It's a trap. Like these things pop up specifically and you end up kind of getting screwed over because you think like, oh, I need to jump at this chance. And it's genuinely just kind of Venus retrograde being like, haha, I'm here to see if you bite. You know, invariably what's going to end up happening is that, you know, you end up with a hairstyle that you absolutely hate. You know, the guy that you thought that you were attracted to gives you some sort of nasty STD, you know, and or the house that you thought you wanted to buy is infested with termites and turns out to be a money pit, okay? You know, no major decisions in love or business, none. I mean, love or business, business, finances, all that kind of stuff. Now again, the range we're looking at is Gemini 5 degrees to 21 degrees. This area of Gemini is going to be lit up 3 times, okay? Venus is going to go forward, she's going to go backwards, she's going to go forward again, all right? And it's not until she clears that the 3rd time that we know we have fresh energy for dealing with stuff. So if she's getting, you know, if she's activating something in this area of your chart, you need to pause, practice the pause, okay? So she has entered the shadow. She enters today, 5 degrees Gemini. She's going to travel to 21 degrees of Gemini. She's going to reach there about May 7th. She'll spin retrograde on May 13th, okay? But she's going to hang out at the 21 degree mark until May 19th. So that's, you know, again, we have that kind of storm period where she hangs out and does the station thing. With Venus, it lasts longer. With Mercury, we have a 3 or 4 day storm on either side. With Venus, we're talking closer to, we got 12 days here, okay? May 7th through the 19th, she's going to hang out at 21 degrees of Gemini. She's going to retrograde from May 13th all the way through to June 25th. That's a long time, all right? So she's going to be going backwards. She travels from 21 to 5 all the way back that way. She'll reach 5 degrees on June 19th. She'll hang out there till June 30th. So again, we got 11 days, almost 12 days where she'll be in one spot. That's the 5 degree mark. Now she hits that mark today. If something happens to you today and you have something on or near 5 degrees of Gemini, you need to pay attention to this June 19th to June 30th thing, because whatever happens to you today, that same energetic point is going to get activated big time come that period of time, okay? So don't say I didn't warn you. June 25th, she spins direct. She'll travel back all the way through to 21, and then she gets to 21 and crosses 21 to 22 on July 29th. So that's the end. She'll exit the shadow at that point. Whatever lesson we're supposed to have learned should have been learned by then. And anything that you do that, you know, doesn't jive with all these notes that I took for you, you will learn, you know, how not to mess with Venus retrograde going forward. So that is your crash course in Venus retrograde for today. If you are a Libra rising or a Taurus rising person, Venus is your ruling planet. The next few months are a karmic lesson for you, and it pays for you to know what house this is for you. And you know, if any points or sensitivities are being touched on, because this is part of your life lesson. I do charts for retrogrades, and I am more than willing to help out wherever I can. So get in touch with me, www.missfortuneastrology.com, or you can PM me here. I'm always around. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.